So welcome to tonight. This is the main event, the finale of our big week of events. The theme for the week's been Jesus worth investigating, and that's what we're going to come to conclusion tonight. Mark is going to speak on, there he is. Mark is going to speak on the invitation of a lifetime. Now just to warm you all up before we get on to that, we've also got a testimony. That's the story of how Brian became a Christian. Brian's going to be speaking to us as well. Let's give you a bit more information about tonight. We're going to run, starting now, until about 9 o'clock. Everything will end by 9 o'clock. We've got this space for a good hour after that if you want to stay around and chat. But if you need to run on, everything will be finished by 9 o'clock. I'm going to invite up Brian to speak first. So Brian's going to be sharing a little story with us.
Hi guys, my name's Brian. I'm just going to share the story of how I became a Christian. I didn't grow up in a Christian family. My parents are not Christians. We went to church as we were growing up, I guess maybe 3 or 4 times a year, things like Christmas, Easter, Mother's Day, that type of stuff. But when I was 8 years old, I discovered a new religion called football, and every Sunday I went to worship at that. And then I guess by the time I was a teenager, I really decided I was an atheist, but really because for me, Christianity was just this old-fashioned, irrelevant thing that was just for old people, and so I figured, well, I'm an atheist, I'm not a Christian. But about 16 or 17, I became convinced that there was some kind of creator God. I believed that the world was too beautiful, too designed for it to have happened by chance, so therefore I became a Christian, I thought, because I figured that if I believed in some kind of creator, that automatically meant that I was a Christian, because I was British and middle class, and that's what Christians were, albeit I'm Welsh, so just about British. But I figured that's what it means to be a Christian. And then I went off to uni here at Bristol, and I met Christians for the first time at halls in Wills Hall. And, yeah, sorry. I was the token state school person at Wills Hall. And I met Christians for the first time there, and there was something really different about them. I became friends with them. And the difference was really that I believed in some kind of creator and figured that that meant I was a Christian, whilst they believed that creator to be Jesus, and they loved Jesus. And that was the difference. And they shared with me what it meant to be a Christian, and it wasn't to be British and middle class, but it was to acknowledge that I was a sinner, and by that it just meant, I guess as Frank Sinatra said, I did it my way. It's the idea of living my life my way and not God's way. I was living in rejection to him, but what it meant to be a Christian was to follow Jesus and to trust his death in my place, that he died taking the punishment for all that I'd done wrong. And they shared that with me. They became friends with me. They loved me in my first year. And I guess it took ages for that message really to sink into my life. I believed it to be at least theoretically true for quite a few months before I actually made a decision to follow Jesus. And then in the, I think it was in November of my second year at uni, my parents were going through a tough time and they were separating, and I figured, you know what, I've heard lots of this stuff about Jesus. I'm gonna pray to him. I'm gonna just ask him into my life. I'm gonna trust him for the first time. And I remember living in Meridian Place in Clifton, and just locking my door one Sunday evening so that nobody would be able to tell what I was about to do, because I was really embarrassed. And locked the door. I remember praying out loud to Jesus for the first time, and just accepting him. I can't remember what I said. It wasn't like I saw a great flashing light or had a really warm, fuzzy feeling there. But I accepted Jesus, and I said, actually, I wanted to follow him now. I wanted to have him as the kind of #1 in my life rather than myself. And that was the day. That was in November of 2005 when I was a student here in Bristol. I became a Christian. And since then, my life has been far from perfect. There's been ups and downs, as there is in everybody's life. But knowing that I have a relationship with my Creator, knowing that purpose and fulfillment in life, that I will be forever in a relationship with him, has brought great joy and satisfaction in my life. Yeah, so that's my story. That's how I became a Christian.
All right, thank you, Brian. If you haven't worked out about us already, about the CU, about any of the guys and ladies, like, we're all about Jesus. This whole week has just been completely about Jesus. The theme is Jesus worth investigating, and I would say if you take one message from this week, you can take that, but actually talk to any of the guys and girls around the CU, anybody like Brian, and they'll tell you stories like that. Jesus is more than worth investigating. Like, it's completely life-changing. So that's the point of tonight, to give you a bit of a better understanding of him. I'm going to invite up Mark to speak, and he's going to welcome up Holly, as he's just reminded me, who's going to read for him. If you look on your tables, you'll find little uncovered Gospels. Do you want to say anything about that? This is the Gospel of Luke. It's like an eyewitness account. He was a doctor, and he writes at the start. It's quite academic, but he writes at the start, "I've written all these things so that you will be more convinced," or something like that. So he's very, very like meticulous. It's quite detailed. Holly's going to read to us from page 102, if you want to find that.
If you don't have one, just get your hand up. This is the parable of the great banquet. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for now everything is ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I've just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you ordered has been done, but there is still room. Go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet.'"
Well, it's great to be with you again this evening. I disappear on a train shortly after this evening finishes. I just want to say, if you've been to a number of things in the week, I've been really helped by your questions as we've been looking at Luke's Gospel together. I hope if you've been to anything in the week, the thing that you've taken away is what James just said, that Jesus is at least worth investigating. As he said, most people in the room who would call themselves Christians think Jesus is worth much more than that, and it'd be worth asking them afterwards. Numbers of them have got hoodies on, you can't really mistake them. Help keep that passage open in front of you, we're going to have a look at it, but let me ask you a question to get us going. Here's the question. Why do you think it is that of all the people studying in Bristol this year, so few people are committed to following Jesus Christ? I guess for some people they'd say it's ignorance, wouldn't they? They never really heard about Jesus, possibly not before a week like this, and so why on earth would they follow somebody they don't really know that much about? They'd be a bit like me when I went to uni. I would have thought I was a Christian. I'd have ticked the Church of England box on the form when I arrived at college, but actually once you pushed me on it, I had never read one of these Gospels, not since I was a child. And I'd never really thought that much about Jesus. I'm sure that for some people the reason is ignorance. But even among those who have heard about Jesus, why do so few people follow him? I was talking to a mate before Christmas and he gave me this answer. He's been thinking about Christian stuff on and off for about 10 years, can you believe it? And he says there's no way he can walk away from Jesus. The evidence is just too compelling for him. But at the same time, he says he's just not quite sure he can commit to Jesus. He says he can't bring himself to live with Jesus as his Lord. Why? Well, he's very honest. He says that because it's in his heart of hearts, he believes that what Jesus offers him is somehow less valuable, less enriching, less fulfilling than what he's got in life already. So my guess is my mate isn't alone. You might be here this evening and you can relate to that kind of feeling. We're pretty happy with life as it is, you might be saying. So why should I surrender myself to Jesus? And so to try and get under the skin of that kind of attitude, we're thinking this evening about an invitation. An invitation that comes to us in and through the person of Jesus. And I want us to see this evening that what is on offer from Jesus is infinitely more satisfying, infinitely more valuable, and infinitely more wonderful than anything this world can offer. So much so that this evening, when we hear about the invitation, it ought to make us, all of us individually, want to respond to God with all of our hearts. So that's what we're about this evening. We're thinking about an invitation. And in that chapter that has just been read for us, Jesus is at a dinner party at the home of a religious person. And if you've ever been to one of those dinner parties where there's a number of you round the table and you're having conversations, and it doesn't really matter what you're chatting about, because what you're chatting about is drowned in the general sort of hubbub and chit-chat of conversation. And suddenly, for no reason whatsoever, every conversation dries up at exactly the same moment, apart from the most embarrassing one. Have you ever been at that kind of dinner party and suddenly you're all ears to a bit of tasty gossip, or somebody's being told off by somebody else? I don't know how you act in an awkward moment like that. Do you give it a little schoolboy snigger and, you know, say it's an awkward moment or something like that? Perhaps you're the sort of person and you just let your ears expand and you take it all in. And that may be you. Perhaps you're very English and you just cringe and curl up with embarrassment. Or perhaps you do what somebody does in this passage and you try and cover it all up. You pretend it hasn't really happened. Do you see, in Jesus' dinner party, everybody's conversation dies down just as Jesus is giving somebody a lecture on dinner party etiquette. Jesus says to them just before this passage, never assume you've got a seat at the top table of a wedding or something like that, because it's so embarrassing, isn't it, when you've got to get up out of your seat and move further down away from the bride and groom. Or he says, when you throw a party, don't just invite those people who will reciprocate. No, invite the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind. Invite those people who can't afford to pay you back. And then did you notice what one of the guests does in verse 15? Having just heard Jesus say, throw that kind of party and you'll get your reward in the kingdom of heaven. Verse 15, one of the guests says, oh yes, won't it be great in heaven? It'll be wonderful to be at God's banquet. He doesn't say exactly that, but that's what he's meaning, really. It's the classic cover-up. Ho, 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 anyone for seconds. But notice, will you, that Jesus doesn't let him off the hook so easily. Jesus says, yes, it will be great in heaven, but what makes you so sure you'll be there? It's punchy, isn't it? It's unexpected. Do you see, this bloke, he may have been a religious man, he may have been a moral man, he may have been a law-keeping man, but his great danger, it seems, is presumption. He thinks that because of his religion, because of his status, because of his office, he's definitely going to be at the banquet. And because of his presumption, Jesus goes on to tell this famous parable. And I just wanted to notice two brief things about it this evening. Here's the first one. Are you ready? It's the best invitation we will ever receive. Look down to verse 16. A certain man once gave a great banquet. Later that man turns out to be the owner of the house. He's clearly the figure we're meant to think of as representing God. And notice, will you, he's a generous host. And I guess straight away that challenges our caricature of the Christian life, doesn't it? Because if we're honest, most of us at times think it's a pretty dreary thing. And if you remember Groucho Marx's great line at the end of a dinner party, as he's shaking the hand of the hostess, he goes, "Madam, I've had a wonderful evening, and this wasn't it." Well, no one would say that to this generous host at the end of this banquet. No, please notice the Christian life isn't something to be endured, like a day in the library or exam week or something like that. No, the Christian life is to be enjoyed, and if you ask your Christian friends afterwards, hopefully they'll talk about that. You see, Jesus doesn't deny the sense of anticipation of the man who says it'll be wonderful in heaven. Jesus says it will. It really will be wonderful. And he gives little hints in the story that he fleshes out later in Luke's Gospel and in other parts of the Bible. Hints of life and forgiveness and unconditional love. Hints of pardon for a past life, for peace in the present, and for real purpose for the future. So please get out of your mind, if you're here as a guest this evening, please get out of your mind any images you've got of God's future world being all of us sitting on clouds wearing Laura Ashley night dresses. I don't think I'd look too good in a Laura Ashley night dress myself, with a kind of laurel wreath and playing a harp or something like that. No, Jesus says we're to think of God having a party, a great banquet. And I don't know if you've ever thought of heaven like that. It's an image that would have been immediately familiar to Jesus' first readers. They would have thought of part of the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament. They'd have thought of Isaiah's promise of a wonderful heavenly banquet, of rich food and well-aged wine. And just as you and I might be thinking, hang on, it's hard to beat a meal at the cowshed, or it's hard to beat a slap-up dinner at the townhouse, and a great bottle of Chateau Lafite or something like that. Notice Isaiah says that there is one item on the menu of God's heavenly banquet that no Michelin-starred chef could rustle up. Isaiah says this: the Lord will swallow up death forever, and the Lord will wipe away tears from every face. Do you see, Jesus wants us to imagine this evening how good it would be to be at a party at which the host doesn't just serve up great food and good wine, but at which the host can swallow up the shroud of death for all time. A few years ago we buried one of our church wardens. Tim had been battling with cancer for 15 years. I'd had the privilege of knowing him and his wife, Felicity, for years. I'd been to all the family weddings, and he asked me to spend the last Sunday of his life with him. Seeing someone die before your eyes is pretty grim, isn't it? I don't know what your last year's been like. In the last year or so, I've seen mates bury their father. I've seen a very good friend bury her husband. And perhaps most heart-wrenchingly of all, I've seen a couple bury their baby daughter. You see, we can't live long, can we, without realising that whatever it is we work for in life, whatever it is we're striving for, career, family, home, whatever it is we achieve, the place where all of us will end up is in a wooden box with brass handles on the side and a small brass nameplate on the top. Death is like a great veil or shroud that sooner or later smothers even the finest of lives. The film director Woody Allen, in one of his perceptive one-liners about life, asked, will any of us ever get out of it alive? More personally, I think of the businessman who asked to see me a couple of months back. As he arrived, everything about him would have suggested success and wealth and influence. But as he told me his story about a doctor's appointment that he'd just been to, where cancer had been confirmed, leaving him months, not years, to live, I could smell the drink. I could sense the fear. I could see his tears, and I could hear the sobs. All of his achievements, or all of his affluence, meant nothing in the face of death. So when God says to us, when I throw my party, I will swallow up death forever, it really will be the best invitation we'll ever receive, won't it? And God says, notice, I'll wipe away tears from every face. I don't know what makes you cry. I guess we cry when sickness is diagnosed. I guess we cry when relationships break up, when we're hurt by those we thought loved us, when it all just gets on top of us. You might be going to a party later. It strikes me that whenever I went to a party at university, there was always somebody blubbing in the kitchen. But God says, notice, if you come to my party in heaven, you can look around and nobody will be crying, because I've wiped away tears from every face. And we're meant to be struck by that. You see, God's having a party, says Jesus, a banquet, and it's going to be a big one. There's no more crying, there's no more dying, and that's why it's the best invitation we'll ever receive. These autobiographical parables, where he kind of reads himself into it as one of the characters. Look down to verse 17, and you see the owner, that's God. He's been preparing the banquet for hundreds of years, and now he sends his servant Jesus to go and say to his people, come, everything's ready. And if we'd been reading through Luke's Gospel up to this point, we'd have seen that Jesus has spent the last few chapters preaching to Jewish people and telling them, accept the invitation, urging them to respond to God's invitation. But then as the story goes on, it becomes clear that this party isn't just for a select few. Well, wonderfully, it's not just for the religious stormtroopers. No, when God has a party, the amazing truth is this: everyone is invited. God will have anyone at his party. Did you notice that in verse 21? What happens? He sends the servant into the streets and the alleys to bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. The religious leaders in Jesus' day would have hated that. There was no place at God's banquet in their thinking for the socially disadvantaged. And Jesus says, what rubbish. What rubbish. There'll always be a place for the outsider at my banquet, because I'm the God of the outsider. In verse 23, he sends out the servant again, do you notice? To make people come in. He won't have the food wasted. He wants to share it. I guess here he's referring to non-Jewish people, like most of us, I guess. Jesus is saying he's the God of the whole world. He's come for all kinds of people, from all nations. See, that's God's attitude. There's no elitism, is there? There's no sectarianism. And if you've understood nothing else of this week, please get this, that is right at the heart of true Christianity. It is all about a generous host extending the most breathtaking of invitations to a wonderful party. And they're extended to everyone to come. It's almost too good to be true, isn't it? Jesus says, look, I know about your life. I know about the things that spoil your world. I know about tears, and I know about death. And I'm making the whole world new. Think of it like a banquet, he says. Think of it like a feast of life. Tears and death, they're not on the guest list. But you are. I want you to enjoy a world that will be so good that you can almost taste it physically every time you draw breath. And so when a Christian invites a mate to follow Jesus, please notice we're inviting you to a party. It's deliberately evocative, isn't it, the language? It's meant to put a smile on your face. You know the way it is with some invitations. There are some we get, aren't there? I don't know what it is for you. Sherry with your tutor, and it kind of goes straight in the bin. You're not going to get to that. Then there are others. I don't know what it could be. It could be a family do, and you think, I probably ought to go. But you're looking through your diary, praying there's something in the diary already, because Aunt Agatha's kind of 80th birthday party is never going to be the kind of greatest fun evening you've ever had in your life. There goes my phone. But then there are some invitations you get, aren't there? And I don't know what it is for you. I'll be shameless. For me, it would be dinner at Wembley, before a U2 concert or something like that. Or it would be, corporate hospitality at Twickenham. I don't get that anymore now that I'm no longer a lawyer. And you get those kind of invitations and you think, whatever is in the diary is no longer in the diary. I am not going to miss that for the world. Last year I entered one of those silly ballots that you sometimes see on the computer on the BBC webpage, and out of the blue, in the post, came this really pucker invitation. The Lord High Chamberlain, blah blah blah, invites you, Miss Reverend Mark O'Donoghue, and your wife, Mrs. Claire O'Donoghue, to Buckingham Palace for a royal garden party to celebrate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, and afterwards to a concert in front of... And I just thought, that was just from putting my name and postcode into a... How cool was that? That, trust me, that is still on our mantelpiece. Okay, I don't even bring it to things like this because that's just... Oh, have I moved that yet? Okay, there are some invitations we get and we think, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Well, how about this invitation? An invitation not from the Queen, but an invitation from God himself to a perfect world without tears and without death. Just tell me, how highly would you prize that invitation? It's so good, isn't it? It's so good. You couldn't begin to imagine that anybody would ever turn it down. And yet as the passage goes on, we see that incredibly people do. And they do with the worst excuses you'll ever hear. And that's the second thing to notice, the worst excuses we'll ever hear. Look down to verse 17 again, would you? I can barely see it in the slide. Verse 17, at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who'd been invited, come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. You see, in those days, there was a kind of double invitation that went out when you had a party. The first invitation said, will you come to a party on such and such a date? They didn't have watches in those days, time was kind of elastic, and banquets took a long time to sort out and prepare. And so you issued the invitation, and on the strength of the people who said yes, they'll come, you went out and you killed the meat or you bought the meat. It was all very expensive. They didn't have fridges, so you had to get the numbers bang on. And then you sent out a second invitation that said, it's ready. It's all ready. It's all been cooked. It's all been ready. So come now. You see, it was inconceivable that if you'd said yes to the first invitation, that you would suddenly drop out of the second invitation. It would be just the rudest thing in the world. Once you'd committed to going, it would be inconceivable, unless for the most dire of emergencies, that you'd pull out. And yet, amazingly, that's what they do. The excuses that Jesus gives, they're not that important. What matters, notice, is that they're all very flimsy. Look down at them, would you? Verse 18, I've just bought a field, I must go and see it. I've just done a deal, I must go and see what sort of deal I've done. I'm afraid it's going to be the same kind of deal in the morning as it is tonight. So why miss the party? It's not just rude, it's insulting, because nobody bought a field in those days in the Middle East without knowing every square inch of it like the palm of your hand. I'm trying to think of what the equivalent would be today. It'd be like you inviting a really good mate to your 21st. And they blow you out, and you phone them up and you say, why can't you go? My parents have splashed the cash, they've hired this place, it's really, I've only invited a select number of mates, it's really expensive, why aren't you coming? And they go, well, I've just been out and I bought something on eBay, and it's cost me £5,000, and I didn't really see it, so I just need to go and see what it looks like. It'd be mad, wouldn't it? The second excuse isn't any better, is it? Verse 19, I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I don't know what you know about buying yoke of oxen. Hands up if you've ever done it. Okay, let me give you, whenever you do it, there's some Welsh people here, they'll have to do it one day. Okay, whenever you have to do it, okay, let me give you the top tip, okay? You need to buy oxen that can pull in the same direction. Okay, pointless having a pair of oxen you can pull off in opposite directions, okay? And so everywhere they bought them, people would test drive them first. Can you believe it? It's like getting a car. Okay, so they'd have a field behind the market square, and you'd go, I fancy that one and that one, and they'd yoke them up together, and you'd see if they could pull in a straight line. Okay, so nobody would buy them without test driving them first, so the excuse is nonsense, and anyway, the oxen would be there after the banquet. So why not come? I guess today it would be like the phone call to your mother. Mum, I'm sorry. I know it's your 50th birthday, I know Dad's booked the restaurant and we're all going out for dinner together, but I've just bought a car over the phone and I haven't seen it and I just need to go and check it out. I'm not sure where you'd be spending Christmas, but it probably wouldn't be at your mum's. Okay, the third excuse seems the most acceptable, doesn't it? Verse 20, I've married a wife, I must go and see what sort of wife I've married. Okay, it sounds plausible because in the Old Testament, when Jewish men got married, they got a year out of the army, so they could settle down, have kids in case they were killed in conflict. Okay? But here's the issue. Jesus is inviting him to a banquet, not a battle. I don't know what your image might be of marriage, okay? But he's inviting him to a banquet, and with the generosity of this host, bring her along. He'll have anybody. Do you see, whether it's business or personal or family matters, the same thing's going on, isn't it? The invitation's got a really low priority. They're saying to the host, your invitation doesn't really matter. Ultimately, you don't really matter. You can understand the anger in verse 21, can't you? Well, we can see why he issues the invitation to the poor and the blind and the lame instead. The kind of people that Jesus has talked about earlier. And we can imagine, can't we, how those people would respond to an invitation like this. You're inviting us? You're inviting us to this kind of banquet? They'd be overwhelmed by the generosity of the invitation. They'd be overwhelmed by the graciousness of the host. And of course they'd come. You see, in verses 23 and 24, there's that compelling mixture, isn't there? First, God's generous determination that every seat be full. He won't waste the food. And then in verse 24, that resolute anger with those who spurn the invitation. Do Jesus' stories always have a happy ending? Doesn't seem so, does it? Jesus is saying at the end of that passage that people who spurn the invitation, people who presume upon God, who make the fatal assumption of thinking that they'll definitely get to heaven, well, he says, you've had your chance. And God sent out the invitation through prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. God had said repeatedly, the banquet's coming. But when God sent his own son, when God sent Jesus into our world that first Christmas, when Jesus came to call people, come to the banquet, Jesus says to lots of these people, you didn't heed the call, so you won't get a seat at the feast. It's not vindictive, is it? It's got to be, we've got to say it's fair. God rejects those who reject God. Do you hear the warning? The religious people of Jesus' day, they wouldn't humble themselves. And so the invitation went out to those who had nothing to offer, those who would humble themselves and accept God's gracious gift. Those who could see that Christianity wasn't about earning or merit or morality, but could see that it's all about grace and gift and enjoyment, God being for you. And that is the key distinction between genuine Christianity and every other worldview that's there in the supermarket of ideas. Because every other worldview tells you what you've got to do to get right with God. And only Jesus talks about what God has done for us in Christ. God prepares a rich banquet, and God says, come. It's all been prepared for us. It's all been provided by God. It is free for us. But please don't make the mistake of thinking it's cheap. Please don't make the mistake of thinking it's cheap. A great friend, and she'd left all kinds of gifts to her grandkids and to her great-grandkids. Little precious things she'd collected over the years, bits of silver, bits of china and that sort of thing. And David sat down with every family member and he told them one by one what they'd been given. That which was free for them, and yet he stressed to them, it's not cheap. It's precious because it comes with the love of your grandmother or the love of your great-grandmother. If I can put it like this, God's salvation is free for us, but it isn't cheap. It cost the life of Jesus, God's only beloved Son, God's innocent Son, who died for undeserving people like you and me. Jesus' point is pretty obvious, isn't it? It would be tragic if we were to miss out on this wonderful party. And yet we can be pretty creative in our excuses, can't we? We might not use these ones. I don't hear many people saying, I've got to go and look at some oxen, or I've got to go and check out my wife. But we might say something like this. We might say, look, I'm okay, thanks very much. I'm not perfect, but I'm better than most politicians, as if that's a high standard. Okay? You might well be. Nobody's disputing that, but the politicians, other people aren't the benchmark. God is, and he's perfect. Or you might say, hang on a minute, Mark, I'm pretty self-sufficient in life. I've got myself to Bristol, and I'm going to back myself to make it on my own, thanks. Well, do you think if you could make it on your own, God would have sent his only Son to die on a cross? That would make him quite a wicked God, wouldn't it? Quite a cruel God. Knowing we could make it on our own, but sacrificing his only Son. Or you could say, it's not my scene, if I'm honest, Mark. I'm not really into all this religious stuff like these weird hoodie wearers. Okay, let me reassure you, neither am I. Okay? And neither are most of them, even though they do wear hoodies, okay? Most people here tonight who are Christians find ritual and religion leaves us cold. We're not into that. We're into relationship. We're into relationship with God and relationship with others. Or you might say, Mark, you don't know me from Adam, and I'm just too bad. Well, isn't it remarkable that God says, whatever your track record, and please trust me, nobody this evening has a track record that we would want playing on a screen here. Whatever our track record, there are no prerequisites. Just leave it all behind. It's all been provided. It's all been prepared. Just come, says Jesus. But perhaps we shouldn't put ourselves in the place of those first recipients at all. No, it seems much more likely, I think, as we read this passage, that we're meant to see ourselves as the people in the highway and the beggars lying in the hedgerows. It's not flattering, but we're meant to see ourselves as utterly homeless and helpless, and now we're being summoned to enjoy the feast. And what would defy all belief would be if somebody begging by the side of the road or lying in a hedgerow would refuse the best invitation they'd ever received. No thanks, actually, I've got something better on tonight. I just can't be bothered. The beggar might need some encouragement. Yes, he really does want you to come. Yes, you can come just as you are. Yet you don't need to change beforehand, just come. But isn't it inconceivable that they'd refuse it? Do you see, here is the most generous of hosts, extending an invitation to a brand new world of life. So before you get to ask me some questions, I'm going to ask you one. What's stopping you accepting it? Can you think of anything that would stop you accepting an invitation that good? You might want to ask me questions. I hope somebody asks me how we accept it. That would be helpful. Okay, over to you. Are we having questions?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, why not turn in 2s and 3s where you're sitting and think what your response is to that passage, what questions you might want to ask, and then it's your time to ask questions. Let's come back together. Last chance to ask questions. I'm pretty relaxed. I've got a ticket out of here, so feel free to fire away. Anybody in a group now where somebody asked a good question that you thought would be helpful to repeat? I'll ask a good question. Don't be bashful. Yep.
We were just thinking about, I guess the parable saying, and you're saying that the reason that some people might not want to accept the invitation is because, that they're making excuses. What if someone said, I really want to believe, but I just can't believe? It's not that I want to make an excuse, it's just that I feel unable to believe. Yeah.
Yep, so let me repeat it. So what if somebody's saying, I want to believe, but I'm just unable to believe? Okay? I guess I'd want to go through and say, what is it you understand about Jesus? If you read it, kind of uncover, what do you understand about him? Do you understand that he's the king God promised to send? That he's a perfect leader who's got an extraordinary, beautiful character, who makes extraordinary, breathtaking claims, and who's got the most stunning power in the world? Do you see him as the perfect leader? Do you accept that about him? Do you realise that you haven't lived in this world with reference to God rightly? Do you realise that you've lived in this world and you've taken all of God's good gifts, and you haven't treated God as God? You haven't treated Jesus as that great king. Do you accept that about yourself? Because my guess is normally it means that somebody hasn't realised who Jesus is, or they haven't realised what we're really like, and that therefore we need to be forgiven by Jesus. We need God's undeserved, unlimited love to us in Christ. We think we're okay without it. And I want to say, which of those two is misunderstood? Where's the misunderstanding? Do you realise who Jesus is? Do you realise our need for Jesus? And if they say yes and yes, I'll then say, well, just come. Realise it's going to be hard, but just say, I want to start following from now on. Please help me, God, to follow Jesus. The reality is the Bible tells us time and time again that we can't do it off our own bat. Okay? We actually need God to open our eyes to realise our predicament. We need God to open our eyes to see how great Jesus is. And we need God to humble us so that we come for help. And that's what stops most of us, isn't it? We don't want to be humbled to say we need help. So I'd encourage them to come if they agree with those two. But often there's a misunderstanding about Jesus or a misunderstanding about ourselves. Anybody want to come back on that or ask a different question? Yep.
different question. So what if the invitation to a blanket like sounds like a nice idea? Like, how can we know that that's true and it's going to be as good as it sounds?
How do we know that the invitation? How do we know it's a kosher invitation? How do we know that it's? How do we know it's a great banquet? Ultimately, we're trusting in Jesus, aren't we? We're trusting in Jesus. Everything we read, as we read Uncovers, we read through Luke's Gospel. Can I trust what he says? Does he sound like he speaks the truth to me? And then we see him go through death for us. We see the one who had perfectly obeyed, who had never broken any of God's laws, who had never fallen short of God's standards like you and me, who lives the life that we should have lived. We then see him go through the punishment that we deserve for our failure. And we say, you've done all of that for me. And then he comes back from the dead. And he says, you can trust me. You can trust me when I said I would get you through death. And you can trust me when I said I'd take you to the other side and what is on the other side. You can stick your hand in mine and ask me to trust me with your life and death. I am worthy of your trust. Do you see, people talk to me, in London people talk to me and they say, oh, I wish I had your faith, vicar. And if I've got a dog collar and they're walking down the road, they say, I wish I had your faith, vicar. And I say, you probably have. It's where you're putting it that matters. Okay? What saves people isn't faith, is it? What saves people is faith in Jesus Christ. So all of you tonight have got faith. Okay? Shall I tell you why I know that? Because you're all trusting that the chairs you're sitting on can hold your weight. Okay? It's more trust for some than others, okay? But you're all exercising trust at this moment, that the chairs can bear your weight, okay? Ultimately, being a Christian means, do I trust that Jesus can bear the weight of my hopes and dreams and ambitions and aspirations? And I want to challenge you to say, where in the Gospel of Luke, where in this Uncover booklet do you find anything that makes you doubt Jesus? On every page he delivers. Every page, so I can trust him that what he says about the life to come will be great. That doesn't mean that the Christian life now is easy. You ask any of the Christians around this room and they will tell you it's a bit, like the stock market graph, isn't it? Good days, bad days. Yeah? There's the kind of being teased by your mates for being part of the God Squad, being the huggy huggies or whatever, okay? Being the CU weirdos, okay? Any of that kind of stuff. There's all that mockery, and yet it's worth it because you know the slate is wiped clean. You know your past muck has been dealt with. You know that in the here and now there is peace with the God who made you, and for the rest of your life there's real purpose. It's worth it. Jesus is worth it. Okay? And if you doubt that, read it and see if you find anything that reinforces your doubt or causes you to trust him. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? There'll be lots. I'll be briefer. Yep.
So I have to be 100% sure it's true before I accept it.
We're never 100% sure. Sorry, do I have to be, sorry, Becky. Do I have to be 100% sure it's true? We're never 100% sure about anything. Okay, let me tell you, my wife is gorgeous. My wife is just unfailingly patient. She is unbelievably generous. She is hot as hot can be. Okay, she is fantastic as a wife. Okay, when we were going out and I got to know her, I didn't know I can tell you there were things I've discovered about my wife since we've been married 15 years. Okay, that it would have been good to know. I didn't know everything about Claire. Okay, if we draw an imaginary line from that wall to that wall. Okay, and somebody at that end, right at that end of the line, is the person who knows nothing about Jesus. And let me say, after this evening, none of us are there. We all know something about Jesus after this talk, don't we? And at that end of the line is the person who knows everything about Jesus. And let me tell you, whatever your Christian friends might suggest, none of us are at that end of the line. Okay, because we're not in heaven yet. Okay, so nobody knows everything about Jesus. All of us are somewhere along the line. And here's the key question. Not do I know everything, but do I know enough? Do I know enough to trust Jesus? Do I know enough about Jesus to want him to be my king? Do I know enough about Jesus to want to say to him, please deal with my sin and my muck and my life? And please, please help me to accept this invitation to this wonderful banquet. You'll know where you are. You might be further down this end and you might think, Mark, I just need to find out some answers. Monday night in the townhouse, clear an hour for the next few Mondays, okay? You want to ask questions about it, Dalton's sitting on the sofa there trying not to fall asleep, okay? Christianity Explored is a great way to find out more. You're allowed to be there. You're allowed to have questions. We've all got questions, okay? Go and find answers, okay? You might say, I need time to think, Mark. Take the time, but do think, okay? The tragic thing is people say, I need the time to think, Mark, and then never get around to thinking, okay? Take the time, but do think. Christianity Explored, Monday night. What time does it start, Dalton? Oh, how embarrassing.
7:30.
7:30.
45.
7:40. Okay, 7:30. You don't want them being late. Okay, 7:30. Upstairs in the townhouse?
Yeah.
Okay, they do good food. I was there last
We'll
time.
buy you a drink as well.
And Dalton will buy you a drink. Look, do me a favour, all go on. I just want to see what the Dalton Dice kind of bank account is. Okay? If you've got questions, find answers. But my guess is there'll be some people here tonight, and you think, I think I know enough. In my heart of hearts, I know enough to take the invitation. I don't know everything. Join the club. Okay, but you know enough to accept the invitation. How do you do that? I said it yesterday at the lunch bar. It's the 3 words I teach my kids. Sorry, thank you, and please. Sorry, Jesus, that I've lived in your world without reference to you as my king. Thank you, Jesus, that you came to die for me. Please, Jesus, help me to follow you from now on. It may be that you're ready to say a prayer like that. And in a moment, there'll be people kind of over at this end of the room who can help you do that. But you might just want to echo it in your hearts now. And say, why don't I pray a little prayer like that? And if you're ready, if you're not ready, don't say it. It'd be mad to say if you're not ready, wouldn't it? But if you're ready, you might just want to echo it in your own hearts, okay? Why don't we just shut our eyes and I'll pray. Jesus, we're sorry that we've lived in your world without reference to you as our King. Jesus, thank you that you came and died for us so that our past could be dealt with, our present could have real purpose, and our future and eternity could be secured. Please help us, Jesus, to follow you from now on. Amen. And I say, if you came tonight and you had never said a prayer like that before, but you've said it now, you've accepted the invitation. Okay? So you walked in here tonight as somebody who is heading for an eternity without God and without every good thing, and you will leave this building tonight as somebody who has accepted the invitation and as somebody who has had all your fault, failure dealt with, your future eternity secured, and it is a great day for you. It is a wonderful day for you. If you prayed that prayer, do yourself a huge favour and tell a Christian friend, because then they can help you. It may be a great idea still to get to Christianity Explored and find out a bit more, but tell somebody so they can help you. I've loved being here for the week. You've been very kind and very patient, and thank you very much for listening again.
Okay, so now there are a few things, you have a few options. You might be still quite sceptical, you might have come with a friend and have some more questions to ask them, so please do. If you came with a Christian friend, they'd love it if you asked them some really difficult questions. You might feel like you've heard enough and maybe you prayed that prayer then and maybe you didn't but you'd like to. You can go over there, I think. Over there there'll be some people who can pray with you. You can also go for prayer even if you don't feel like accepting Jesus right now, but there's something you want to pray about or you feel like something was kind of nudging you, then you felt a bit funny and there was like something that you'd like to go and pray for, you can totally go and have prayer with somebody even if you're not a Christian and haven't just asked Jesus to come into your life. Or you could just chat with your friends. And yeah, just to reiterate, if you're interested in learning a bit more about Jesus and Christianity, there's Christianity Explored on Monday night at 7:45 in the townhouse. Did I miss anything? Okay, great. Thanks for coming.
Like a stone, and I fell heavy into your arms. These days of darkness, which we've known, will blow away with this new sun. But and I will wait for you. So break my step and relent. Well, you forgave and I won't forget. Know what we've seen and him with less. Now in some way shake the excess. 'Cause I will wait for you. And I will wait for you. And I will wait for you. And I will wait for you. Now I'll be bold as well as strong, and use my head alongside my heart. So tame my flesh and fix my eyes